program tonight is around routines. We know that all of you have some sort of routine going on at home with your children, and I think probably what brought you here tonight is wanting to get a little bit more consistency across routines, problem solving some of the behavior issues you might have about routines, and then what we hope to do too is also talk about how learning and instruction can happen throughout daily routines. So one thing that I know parents will say a lot to me is we have no routine, and something that I always want to be mindful of making sure you understand is that whatever is happening throughout your day, your child is seeing that as the routine. So maybe it feels unstructured, maybe it feels chaotic, maybe it feels like you'd like to have some more control around how the routine is happening, but your child is seeing that as the routine. So it might be why you sometimes see some of those repeat behaviors that every time you say, it's time to get your diaper changed, little so-and-so starts saying, no, I don't want to get my diaper changed, because they're ready for you. So what we can look at too is why are routines important? Why is consistency and repetition throughout our routines important for our children? One reason is that it can really strengthen the relationship that you have with your child. It helps to make those routines easier that have been challenging, and you can embed those goals, as I mentioned before. So all of your children are working on goals in different areas, and when routines are going well and kids are engaged in those routines, it's a really nice time to be working on some of those skills that you want to see them improve in. So we'll talk a little bit more in depth about all of those factors. So what is a routine? It's something that happens daily. It's something that you complete on a regular basis in any event. And it could be that your particular routine, like a bath time, has certain expected activities connected with it. So your children will let you know, that they want to do something. They might bring you the object that they remembered that was part of the routine before, even when they're not yet verbal. So yeah, let's go ahead to some slides. And so you each have a packet, and on the right is the PowerPoint presentation, so you can follow along. It's got the slides that will be up on the screen, and you can take notes on it, or there should be paper too on the table for you to fill through. Behind the PowerPoint are some of the activities that we're going to do tonight. So there's some blank forms, and we'll get to those as we go along and kind of discuss those in further detail and do a couple of those activities together. On the other side are some articles that we found that kind of come at it from a few different angles, and I just found them to be really helpful. The new one that I added this year, it's called The Overlooked Factor That Helps You Bond with Your Kids. And it talks briefly about routines and why they're important. And then the second part of that article talks about like family rituals. And I thought that was just a really important take on it, because what we're talking about is kind of the day-to-day and these early routines, and some of these routines will change as your kids get older. But that long-term sort of family ritual part was just a really nice piece that I liked about that article. So you might check that out. There are more articles at the back table that aren't included in this packet, so help yourself to those. If it looks like it's the last copy, let me know. We can get more copies. Okay, so we talked about how routines are an important part of each day. They're the parts of the day that are meeting the child's basic needs. So feeding, bathing, they typically involve those regular routines that have to happen. But it's also going to involve recreational aspects to the routine as well, going to the park, going to church, going to grandma's house. And so some of this we talked about. I think will bring us to, okay, where to begin.
So what we're talking about basically, where we're beginning is sometimes where we want to start is where is your child having a difficulty, what routine is your child having difficulty with, and looking at what skills are we looking to acquire, what skills are going to be more functional for them, and what home routines are vital, are they important. So bedtime, obviously that's, sleep is very necessary. So that routine is a vital routine for your day. And what are the priorities for your family? And then in the routine, is there a step that is consistently difficult? So you start with the routine and everything's going fine, and then there's always this one step that is a challenge. And so then you can look at that and break down that step and look at how you can build skill in there, or change it up a little bit to make it a little bit easier. And so what we want to do is we're going to look at our daily activity schedule. It's in your packet. And we're going to use this activity to identify those times throughout the day where we may need to try and simplify some steps to develop skills or implement strategies that support the children to be more successful. It can be useful to identify times throughout the day where there's greater independence or success, and we may be able to teach new skills and be able to target something and create more independence. So what we were thinking about doing is picking, we probably can't go through all the routines of the day, but pick maybe 1 to 3 of those routines that are more of a challenge. And some of the ideas that we had for some of the routines, toileting routines, we frequently hear families say that is a big challenge for us.
So let me read a couple of these, and then I'll move to the other page that has the routines. So on this one, I'll just kind of note the 2 that are circled. So one is mealtime, and what the parent wrote, if you can't see it too well, is what's the description of the routine. So I prepare his food and then usually sit on the couch and spoon feed him. It's okay, let him eat finger foods off the plate. I usually try to tell him what he's eating and say yummy. I'm trying to feed him in his high chair more, but he's not as tolerant. And so then over on the right, how does your child respond during that routine? They noted he enjoys it unless he's in his high chair, and then that he's starting to tolerate that a little bit. So, and today what we'll do is kind of have you just do a brief part of it like Jen mentioned, but you might find this really useful to, once you're at home, really look at each of those times during the day and just kind of, go through it either together with your partner, or yourself, and start to look at it. It can really give you a bigger picture of where are we really breaking down during the day. And sometimes the answer might be it depends. Maybe it's not consistently a difficult routine, and then you can start to kind of examine why it might have fallen apart on a certain day. Sometimes it's obvious, sleep and coming down with a cold or something like that. So let's just kind of look then at some of these routines. So here's some that you might have thought of. You can also take a look at some that aren't on that list and think about, maybe it's a community thing that's more difficult for your child. Sometimes the routines go really well at home, and other times it's that whenever you leave the house it's challenging. Sometimes it's just a mix. So, and just to reiterate, like Molly said, if we would take a few minutes to do this, and then really just focus on that last column to just see, is it, and I believe it says at the top of the document, is it something that's enjoyed? Is it something that they resist? Or what was the third option? Tolerate. Tolerate. Yeah. So just kind of look at that and just jot down a description of it, and we'll take maybe 5 minutes or so? Yeah, 5 minutes,
5 minutes or so to go through that on the daily activity sheet, and just kind of target maybe 2 of the activities throughout the day.
Did you all get pens? There you go. Yeah, I think that's
Okay, so from completing the daily activity sheet, was there anything that jumped out at you? Any aha moments? Anything that you thought was, wow, I didn't think about it in those terms before? Shout it out if you're thinking of anything.
You want to share that, Rebecca or Josh? Something that struck you?
I would say the consistency on having our son eat at the table versus eating in the living room watching TV.
Mm-hmm.
And consistent on what I do or what he does or what grandma does.
Yeah.
So having that more consistent, I think would help a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So that consistency between just different family members in those specific routines. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Yes, well, we just figured out that I wake up Mason like 45 minutes prior to getting to school.
Mm-hmm.
She does 15 minutes prior to school.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
So
And that had to be a
the-
bit of an aha to be
The routine
But at least
time.
we're doing the same thing,
Yeah.
it's just different times. But
Yeah.
he also is a boy and doesn't have anything to get ready, where I'm getting ready and then I'm going to work.
You're getting
not
ready.
pulling this car now.
I mean, but he does it, he stays home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but-
So you have to get ready to leave the
Yeah.
house, and you're just.
So I'm busy
yeah.
getting mine, so it's just like, oh, if I wake him up closer to time, I
Right.
have more time to
Yeah.
work on myself, because if I wake him up, then
Absolutely.
it takes away from what I'm doing,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I can work on getting him up earlier, because that would help him
Yeah.
wake up a little, give him time to
Yeah. Yeah.
get ready for the day versus
So
just
having-
waking up and throwing him on the bus.
Mhm.
Yeah. Having enough time.
Yeah.
Mhm. Anyone else want to share? Okay, well, I was going to point out, there's one of the handouts in the back. I didn't make multiple copies because it's really lengthy, but it's called the Family Routine Guide. And one of the pages that's in your packet is just that simple page that says Family Planning Sheet. And so this is we're not going to take the time to do the exercise today, but this is kind of an important step anytime you have a behavior that you're trying to problem solve. It could be related to routines, it could just be any behavior. But whenever we're examining behaviors, we always want to look at, what the behavior is. What does Avery do during this routine? Why do I think she does that? And so, it could be she doesn't want to stop playing. It could be there's a sensory factor. Something's bothering my hair, or it's noisy, or you're trying to hurry me too quickly. So their reaction during the routine, it's always important to kind of make your best guess at predicting what is, why do I think she's reacting that way? And then the 3 columns are what could I do to prevent the problem behavior? What can I do if the behavior occurs? And this is kind of that intentional planning ahead. So whenever we're dealing with like a behavior in the moment and we're hurried and we're stressed, we tend to be more reactive. So sometimes when we kind of just jot it down, it's not like you have to follow your chart around, but when you do that writing down and kind of planning it out, the next time that it comes around, you kind of have a plan. Ooh, I was going to try this. And then we're always thinking about what are the skills I'm trying to teach. So that's the 3rd column. Not just that I want to extinguish the behavior that's happening that might be negative, but what am I trying to teach? And for our purposes today, it's part of that new routine and increasing your child's independence during those daily routines. Okay, so let's see. So how do we teach those new routines? So learning a new skill, we have to think about the complexity of that for our little guys. We're talking about some of our children experiencing some developmental delay. Maybe they have a different learning style. So the routine itself might be more difficult just for them to know and understand what are the expectations, what am I supposed to be doing, what's my expected response. They may have rigid thinking, so they're going to be, repeating their negative behavior patterns. So as much as we can provide all the information that your child needs within that step. So it's giving them, in many cases, a lot of information ahead of time. We'll show a lot of the examples of the visuals we use. It's talking about giving a way that's very clearly letting them know what our expectations are. One of the ways we can talk about routines that are going to happen is while it's happening, we're narrating what's going on. You're washing hands, so you're talking about what you're doing. We're going to turn on the water. We're going to get some soap. We're going to put our hands in the water. Now we're rinsing. Oh, we have to dry. So that narration is a really important part about describing and letting kids know exactly what's happening. And then we may need to provide supports during that routine, because if they, are distracted by things around them, sometimes we kind of have to set that up. We have to make sure our materials are there. So if we don't have the soap available, empty containers, that sort of thing, when you're flying at the last minute trying to pull stuff together, that's sometimes where routines start to break down. And then sometimes it's a matter of maybe they understand kind of the general idea of doing a step in the routine, but they don't know how to put it all together. So this is one example of a mini schedule. So we think of the schedule of the day in terms of the different routines that happen, but we also think of breaking down those steps within the routine so that kids can know, first this is going to happen, then that, then that. And you might have a visual for it. You also might just kind of give them that information auditorily, just let them know what are the steps that are going to happen next. And then one of the other things we had noted there was allotting enough time. And that is a really important part, because if it's something you want them to learn how to do independently, like put your coat on, if we're pushing those little arms in, we got to get your coat on, we got to get your coat on, then they're not learning that independence part of it. So you kind of think about how long that might take, and you won't have all that time every day for each of those steps, so maybe thinking ahead of time, like today I'm going to really practice putting that coat on, and giving yourself a good 5 minutes to know that there's enough time to practice, because it takes that repetition and practice. And then, so that kind of leads us into levels of prompting, because that's often sometimes why your children are having difficulty with a certain routine, is you as the adult will need to provide the right level of support. You don't want to provide too much support, because that might be where you get some pushback too. They want to do things for themselves, or by doing too much for them, you kind of lead to that dependence too, and maybe they become too prompt dependent. But it's a dance, and so sometimes you've provided a level of prompting, like a full physical, and I'm going to teach Jen how to put her coat on, or how to wash herself, in the bathtub. So that would be considered a physical. And physical prompts are touchy, literally. Because they're tricky, because sometimes when you go to provide physical support to your children, you know what they do, right? Ah! And they throw themselves down, and they reject that. So it's got to be, read their body language. So if they are pulling back from that, you don't need to provide it. But you can always help, ask, do you want me to help you? And show that extra physical support. A gesture support, I'm sure you use them all the time. And so that's just using your pointing. So if they're not, if you're giving a verbal direction and you see they're looking all over the place, you want to make sure they can see what you're talking about. And verbal imitation is either modeling for them, or also if they're saying part of the routine themselves, you know, they're using some language during the routine, you can also imitate their words to kind of, that's another way to kind of be engaged back and forth. Questions would be maybe those indirect questions about things like, you know, what do we do next? So that's a less direct level of prompting. So now you're getting to a point where you know they probably know what's going to happen. And they might not say it verbally, but, you know, you can kind of give that weight, like, oh, what do we do after that? And they might just physically kind of do the next step. And time delay is really giving them that response time, because you might give a direction and you want something to happen quickly, but for many of our kiddos, they really need that time to process it. So give them a minute and kind of watch. Sometimes we do a count in our head, 1, 2, 3, maybe up to 5. Just give it that few seconds, and then sometimes it happens when you least expect it. So then we'll kind of lead into visuals, because that's such a huge part of what we do here at school. You know, if you've seen our classrooms, we are using visual systems all throughout the day, and it's one way of really providing that structure for our kids and giving them a very static representation of what the expectations are.
So as Molly had said,
why
we use visuals. So when we have those regular routines, when they're presented visually, they can be taught at a really young age. So when we're looking at a bathroom routine, or when we're looking at washing hands routines, I don't know if you've all been near our our children's restrooms, but we have that hand washing strip, and it's just another way where we can reference that and provide that visual support. And as Molly said, it's static. It doesn't change. Even after that verbal is given, the visual stays, so it's still there. Throughout most of our classrooms, we have visual schedules that kids can reference what comes next. It helps them know what is going to happen next, and feel more confident in knowing what's coming up. And then they benefit just as we do. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have a running grocery list in my phone at all times, because I need that visual to remind me of what I need. And kids benefit from the same thing. And it just helps them remember what's coming next. And I'm sure that some of your kiddos are already on routine, and they really need to know what's coming up. We also have visuals support our positive behavior. And so using something like we have our first thens, they help a child understand what will happen after they do something that might be less desired. So, you know, I have examples of something that we use in our classroom for our fine motor activities. Not all of my kiddos want to do cutting and drawing and things, so we have options. So first we're going to do our cutting, and then we get to play with the magnetiles, a highly preferred. And they just know, okay, I'm going to get through this, and then I get to do that. And then we see less behavior when they know something else is going to come up. And then once taught, the adults can fade out the routine to allow that child to kind of self-monitor. And as we had mentioned, they're static. They remain present after the words are spoken. And ultimately, we do want our students and our children to be more independent. And so using those visual cues, we can kind of fade ourselves back out of that a little bit, and they can continue to gain their independence using the visuals that are provided.
Mm-hmm. And the other piece to that is sometimes the visual leads to less of the power struggle that happens. So you give one more verbal direction, and they're like, I don't want to hear another word coming out of your mouth, Dad. And so, you know, you just, it's the visuals talking.
Right.
You know, it's not Mom and Dad right now.
Right, and it is, and sometimes we just stop talking altogether and just hold that picture there, and it's just lessens that behavior, and it does lower that power struggle a bit. Let's skip to page 9. So some picture tips. I'm going to do the next slide.
Oh, sure.
For some of our students, and children, it depends on your child. They can communicate and understand at different levels. So you would determine your child's visual stage. So there's things like objects. We have object images. I don't know if we have any object schedules, but
so for instance, a simple one, like it's time for diapering, so the diaper.
The bathroom, yeah, the
giving
diaper.
the diaper. That would be an example of an object that you use within a routine.
We could use some actual photos, so like a real photograph, and you could use your child's photograph of their backpack and their shoes and their, if it's like getting ready to leave for school.
And if you ever catch them in the routine, like they're in
yes.
the bathtub or they're doing the schedule independently, snap that photo. Yeah, that's when you want to catch them.
And then they see that success and themselves doing it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we'll, in the classrooms, try and get pictures of kids doing these things throughout the day so that we can create a visual schedule or a routine strip using their own pictures. Some children will respond to a line drawing. I am not the best artist, but I tell you, if I pull out a blank first then board and draw a couple pictures, sometimes it's just easy enough to take myself out of it and just, that's it, especially if I don't have that medium available, the picture available.
Yeah. I did that today. I had a student who was really focused on getting the Valentines because there was a little candy heart and he wasn't quite waiting, and he kept getting more and more anxious and asking about it. So I just drew in the most line drawing people that I could, Teacher Molly at circle time and the students sitting in the circle and the little Valentine bag, and I wrote circle time. That's when you're going to get your Valentine. Oh. And that was it.
Right. So even in those moments when you don't have a picture of exactly what's happening, even drawing it out and explaining it as you're drawing it works great. And text. Sometimes we have some readers that just writing the word. I've had friends in my classes that I'm not in a place to respond to a visual, but I write a word on a board and I've got them, and they're like, okay, I know I'm going to do this now. So you just read your child and where they're at, and that's how you can develop what pictures will work best in their routines.
And I would say, even if you think they're at the symbolic picture stage, include the text, because you never know when they're going to, it's that early exposure, it's the pre-literacy piece, so it's the beginning link of, picture or symbol to word.
And introduce it again in that pre-literacy. This isn't the greatest example of that because it's in a ring, but if you can't do it left to right so that they're starting to, get that that's the way that the routine goes and the words flow.
Another way to do a routine, though, is a top to
bottom.
So that's more like a checklist, and that's an option, too.
And then place the objects on a high contrast so that they can see if it's if you're taking a photograph. So it's something along those lines where you can see that object. So if it's a white funnel, you put it on a white background. That's not going to stand out. So making sure that it's on a high contrast background. And then try and make them visual and sturdy, easy to handle. So usually ours are laminated or covered in contact paper. Contact paper, you can buy a roll of it at Target.
Clear contact paper.
Clear contact paper. And then the pictures, like we said before, they can come from a variety of sources. You could do clip art on Office. You could use magazines. You could use toy and food packaging if they're very specific on certain brands. Cut out a picture of the Cheerio box or electronics. I had a friend a few weeks ago that was not wanting to stand up and walk back for a snack, and I didn't have my visuals with me, and I had my phone, and I just pulled up a picture of graham crackers, which happens to be a preferred snack, and stood right up and walked right with me to class. So you just use what you have available, and we have a lot available these days with smartphones.
And you could even start to think ahead and store some of those images in your phone.
If there's something that you know.
Got it right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're moving more towards that technology. Some of us, we're still going old school because this is
all of our things.
This is our method of the past. But all of these types of systems, if you start to picture it in the electronic format, that you might be using more readily.
And they do have apps for like first thens and things like that, but which I'm not sure of all of them, but they do have things like that. If you typically are a person that always has your phone with you, then that might be something you want to look into. Make sure the visuals are at your child's eye level. So if you have a routine set up in the bathroom, if you're putting it too high to where you can see it, they're not able to access it as easily, so make sure it's at their level. They can be as general or as specific as they need. Again, a line drawing works fine sometimes. Sometimes they need to be more specific, like an actual brand of a Ritz cracker rather than just a general cracker picture. But you would know that with your child and just figure out what works best for them. And then don't forget to use them. I many times have been like, oh yeah, I need to use my picture. It happens, but use it and it will work.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've got some
don't
examples.
Put them in a drawer. That's where they
Oh.
end up. Yeah, we've families will create them, or we give them to preschool teachers, and sometimes they get tucked away in that drawer. And and you're afraid to leave them out. They're either not tidy or they're getting something spilled on them. But find a spot where they can be either posted on the wall or in some sort of bin or something that's readily accessible.
Yeah. So then we've got some examples.
Yeah.
If you want to go through.
So just looking at some of these, thinking of durability. So somebody had an example of one with a clipboard, and sometimes we find just those materials that are thicker. A lot of kids will tear the schedule if they don't want to do it, or they're easily destroyed. So if you have them in some type of format that's going to hold up in your bag, or if you give it to the child. And the old DVD cases and VHS tape boxes are great because you can use them as the storage and also use the front of it as a picture. So I only recently started thinking of, I've used them as the first then on the outside, but you could also use them as just the individual picture. So just put, you could have your routines of the day in each photo, with a whole set of those boxes, and that might be a nice way to do it. And let's look at a couple others. So the ring is another option. A lot of times we wear them and carry them with us because it's something you can kind of grab quickly and just show that quick visual.
And then we have something like this where it's kind of the schedule. It goes back to one of them that's more linear, and we can actually, if seeing all of it at once is just too much and they need one step at a time, this is just created with a manila folder, and you can just bring it out and you can open up one step at a time. So then they can just have that individual picture, and it's not quite so overwhelming if everything's out there. So that's a nice way to do that sometimes.
Yeah. And then there's that.
And then I think is, oh wait.
Do you want to comment on that?
Oh,
page?
this one, okay.
Yeah.
So we had talked a little bit about the first then cues, just, helping them be able to wait for a preferred activity. First, we need to go and get coffee with grandma, and then we're going to go to the park. Or first we need to go to the grocery store, and then we're going to go to the pump it up place.
That idea about first then, earlier Jen talked about you can use first then for either putting a less preferred activity and then leading to the more desired. So this is kind of like the reward or the reinforcer. Or you can think about a first then just in terms of sequencing. Right. Like first this happens, then that happens. So it's kind of a multi-purpose thing. And you can, like we said before, you could put as many steps or as few.
And then also thinking about, things like stop and go, you can do that, with like a red light, green light, stop, go, a game, and then it can be embedded into one of those routines that might be a little bit more challenging. Say you're going out to the car and they have a tendency to run off. You can start, stop, wait for me, and then, let's go. And it can just kind of make some of those other transitions and things in routines a little bit easier after you've, played with it in a game before.
Yeah, and you might feel like I've said stop 100 times during that time and they're not listening. So really that pre-teaching, thinking of times you can play that activity before it's in those higher, safety concern times. So you're in a corralled area, you're in the gym, you're in a play space that has walls, and then do a stop and go kind of game and practice it ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so just some more strategies, if you want to get that. There's the auditory cues that we want to do, and we do this so much in our classrooms. Even we'll have, I've got 2 timers set at all times. There's the warning timer, oh, we have 2 more minutes. And then there's the actual timer that goes off that says, now it's time to change. So, you're out playing, and just give your kids those warnings saying, we have 1 more minute and then it's going to be time to go. Or using...
I have a comment on that. Yeah. Sometimes I've noticed students who might kind of trigger or react when you say you have 1 more minute to play, or 1 more minute and then it's circle time. And maybe that's what they're stressing about. So often I will try to say the 1 more minute to continue doing the positive thing they're doing.
Right.
You have 1 more minute to play with your Legos. And so then they're thinking Legos instead of, oh no, I got to go get my diaper changed or get the bath.
Yeah. You might think about using some transition cues. So either a timer, or if the noise is too much, some lights. A soft bell. Sometimes we'll use like a visual, like a sand timer or something that's more visual but not a noisy. Some of our kiddos don't like that noise. Counting up or counting down. So 1, 2, 3, bath time, or like a blast off, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then definitely, probably our number 1 go-to. We have a song for everything. Clean up, everybody, everywhere. And then,
right?
This is the way we wash our hands, wash our hands, wash our hands. So we sing about everything. And so just using those songs at those silly moments and making it fun and uplifting and a little lighter might kind of bring down some of that negative behavior they might have around a stressful routine for them.
Yeah, the one I
started
doing
You're
more
gonna
recently.
sing that one.
Okay.
It's a new one for me.
So it's kind of, I started using it as like the warning to the next thing. So use those songs as you're doing it, but I started doing a song where you're singing almost time to such and such. So is it London Bridge?
Yeah. I think it was London Bridge, yeah.
Almost time to eat our dinner. Eat our dinner. Whatever you want to sing. Eat our dinner. Almost time to eat our dinner. We are hungry. And add whatever you want in terms of the language. But I just noticed, the cadence of that particular song is kind of slow and lilting. And when I sing the almost, I've got it kind of stretched out. So it's just really a pre-warning for them. And then I'll give them another minute to finish what they're doing. And a lot of the children just start responding right away to that anyway. And so that's been a good one.
To remember that for circle time.
Yeah.
So I think at that point in time, we're going to take about a 10-minute break. Are we doing okay?
Yeah, I
we're
had the
actually pretty good.
planning guide, but we already touched on that.
Yeah. So if we want to take about a 10-minute break, restrooms are here. There's more snacks and refreshments, and we'll come back a couple minutes after 7. Okay. So now we'll talk a little bit about embedding goals into our daily routines. So routines, as you are able to identify those certain times of the day that you have opportunities to embed some goals. So if a goal for you is, as Molly had mentioned before, your child putting on their own jacket, then you can start to embed that as part of that routine of leaving. Or putting their shoes on. I know I have a lot of parents that are like, I just want them to put their own shoes on. So that can be part of that routine, but again, give yourself that time because they're going to need to kind of stumble through it a little bit, and eventually they'll be able to do it independently, but they might need some assistance at first. So you can use routines as that opportunity to learn new skills. They're consistent. They happen all throughout the day. There are routines all day long. As Molly said, it may not feel like it's a very structured routine, but it's a routine that your child is seeing, and they happen all day, every day. And then research shows that young children learn best through functional routines that happen at home with their families.
I would say the other thing to add to the idea about really working on a new skill is you're going to want to target that routine that's going well. So pick the most positive routine during the day when your child's rested, seems focused and ready to learn, and that's the time of day to practice working on language or communication goals. It might be, part of the routine that they're going to do independently. But your difficult and challenging routines are when you work on just coping and regulation skills and helping them work through that. But the routines that are going well, that's when you're looking at teaching new skills and pushing them beyond the level that they're at.
And most importantly, you may not necessarily be targeting like the IFSP goals that we have written, but you're looking at overall skills that are going to promote that independence and what's important for your family. So it's important for your daily life, and will help your child increase their self-confidence. Another activity we're going to do is the routine circle. So in this particular routine, we targeted bath time. And so this is a nice way in this routine circle where you can identify a specific routine and you can start to, it's like a brainstorm, and you can identify some learning opportunities in that particular routine. So with this example, we've taken bath time and written down, so like there's language that you can model during the routine. So, the water is warm, it's wet, you can play with the toys, the duck is hiding, I'm pouring, you can work on some verbs, and directional cues, sit down, wash hair, wash body, dry off, close eyes when you're rinsing that soap out of their hair. Some of the prompting, that 1 more minute, and then we're going to wash hair. This is the way we wash our hair, adding those songs in there. And then, the first wash hair, then all done. Visual supports around it, pictures of washing hair, drying, having the clothes and towel where they can see them. Other strategies. These are great. They're kind of sabotage in a way. You have the toys in a Ziploc bag that they can't open their own. They need to ask you for help to open the toys and get them out and start eliciting some communication in there. Put just a little bit of water in the bathtub. Uh-oh, what's wrong? And play a game so they need to ask for more water. And then always those opportunities for positive reinforcement. Great job washing. You're swimming like a fish. You look so clean. You smell so great. And just some ways that you can embed some of that stuff throughout a bath time. And there's a lot of things that you can target there.
And to reiterate about the positive reinforcement, that's something to just do throughout the daily routines. Every day, all day. And one kind of rule of thumb, well, you can look at a couple different ratios, but sometimes you have to kind of react or give a redirection or maybe a negative, but you want to outweigh the comments you're making, like 5 to 1. So if you had to give a redirection or something that was kind of a negative, you want to be making sure that most of what you're saying to your child is positively reinforcing what they are doing.
Yes.
And even if it's a challenging routine for them, it's hard to find that part where you can say a positive. So you might really have to look, but search for it, because the more they hear those positives, that's the other way to decrease the negative behavior.
Right.
So we have a wheel in your packet, and I think we're going to take time to do that right now. How's our time?
I think we've got a few minutes.
So and maybe we won't take more than a couple minutes, but pull out the routine circle, and if we don't finish it right now, let's get it started so you can kind of think about ideas for how you can add to it. This is your little working document. So I would say pick a positive, you don't have to do bath time, so pick a positive routine and think about how you'd like to start working on new skills. And so feel free to ask us questions about that, but just jot down some of your ideas. Okay, we'll go ahead and draw back to the training.
So were there any aha moments or any reflections from your routine circle that anybody wants to shout out? any great thing to target that you hadn't thought about before during a specific routine? Anything?
I'll go.
Okay, thank you.
Just kind of going this, I think something kind of popped out is more of letting him run the activity rather than us just like, okay, come here, wash your hair. All right, now.
Yeah.
Just kind of letting him get to the next step first before we.
Right. Yeah, and increase that independence in that particular routine. That's great.
That's why we're here.
So adding those visuals, putting in some of those supports. Sometimes with bath or hair washing, right, they're scared, so making sure some of the materials or supports you put in place, like, you know, what is bothering him about it? Maybe it's that the water's going to drip in my eyes. So what sort of system or method can we put in place to let him know, you know, oh yeah, you don't want, you don't like the water in your eyes, you know, let's figure that out. Maybe it's the visor, maybe it's you holding your hand, maybe it's making sure they know we're going to lean way back, and just talking through that part that's scary or difficult. Yeah, my son used to hate having his face washed, and I think, you know, a lot of kids, you come at them with that rag, and it just feels like you're smearing stuff all over me, and, you know, but I turned the rag into Mr. Ragamuffin. Mr. Ragamuffin was going to eat the food, and, you know, it turned a really aversive part of his daily routine when I needed to wash his face up after a meal into something that he would, you know, and your point about letting your child control part of it. So when I first did it, you know, he wasn't so sure about it. Him hold the rag, and then he's trying to hold puppy, and then he'd want me to do it, and so without fail, every single time, Mr. Ragamuffin got that face clean as a whistle. So finding ways to make it fun, too, is part of helping that routine improve. Okay, so and what are the critical lifelong goals for having your daily routines go well, and that enjoyment, you know, and the valued interaction with people. So that idea of that was a fun part of the routine, you know, that was part of that relationship building. We want to be able to communicate intentionally and effectively, so, you know, being focused on what we're learning in that. It helps our children to organize the information, to learn new meaning and purposes about what the routine is for. If you're driving them through that routine, maybe they don't understand how they're the agent in that routine. And it just will continue to help them accept new situations because they'll feel that competence. And working towards that independence, and less of a need for us to be giving constant verbal direction. So once they have that routine down, we're not constantly prompting verbally. And if you are constantly verbally prompting, maybe it's more than your child needs to hear too. So kind of give that wait time and watch how much they're doing. If they're doing part of the routine, don't give a verbal prompt for it. And so it's a way for us just to manage our stress and your child's stress during those daily routines. We're going to make sure we have enough time at the end for you guys to look through the visuals, make sure you have all the articles you want to take. The visuals we can kind of spread out. You can actually take the time tonight to kind of cut and create some strips you'd like to do. You can gather it all and take it with you. We can help put out some tape or the word finding.
Paper cutter.
Paper cutter. The cutter thing. Yeah. So that we can kind of spread out and make some of those materials right now that you can take home with you tonight. So maybe target a certain routine you want to focus on. But are there any questions before we move to that next part?
No questions?
And if the thought's going through your mind still of that problem behavior during a routine where, maybe you didn't quite come up with ideas for how to work through that, feel free to talk to Jen and I too as we're working on the materials for take home, and maybe we could have some ideas that are specific to your child. So yeah, feel free to ask those questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for coming, and please feel free to come look up at some of the visuals we have up here. Let us know if you need any other materials. We can grab some things, like she said, from the workroom and bring them in to make some things. So,
yeah, one other comment about how to reinforce the visuals. If you have little, I'll go pull some packing tape, but Jen had commented on clear contact paper. But I'll tell you, clear packing tape is like the strongest. It's indestructible. Like you could, they can rip laminate, but you cannot rip that packing tape. So it'll last forever.
I used it the other day to make a crown for my daughter.
Yeah, and it's
It works fantastic.
Yeah.
So
Clear
use it all the time.
folder holders too.
Yes.
Folder holders.
Folder holders.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.